Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger say that they are withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. The three West African countries accuse the ICC of being a, quote, instrument of neo-colonialist repression.
France just lost 6 countries in 3 years, and almost nobody saw it coming. For over 60 years, France treated West Africa like an extension of its own backyard. They controlled the money, stationed troops in multiple countries, and kept leaders in power who answered to Paris, not their own people. But in the last 3 years, that entire system collapsed. Military coups kicked out French soldiers, currencies are being questioned, and a whole generation of Africans is saying they've had enough. The question everyone is asking now is simple but terrifying. What happens next? Because when one empire leaves, someone else always shows up to fill the gap. Let me paint you a picture of what French control actually looked like, because most people have no idea how deep this went. After African countries gained independence in the 1960s, France never really left. They just changed the way they operated. They kept military bases across West Africa, with thousands of troops permanently stationed in places like Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. These weren't just symbolic forces. They were there to fight terrorist groups, sure, but also to protect governments that stayed friendly to French interests. If a president started getting too independent, too willing to challenge Paris, France had ways of reminding them who was really in charge. They called this system Françafrique, which literally means Françafrique. And it was about as subtle as it sounds. But the real control came through money. 14 African countries, most of them former French colonies, use a currency called the CFA franc. This isn't just some regional currency. It's printed in France, managed partly by the French treasury, and pegged to the euro. For decades, these countries had to deposit 50% of their foreign reserves in French banks. Think about that for a second. Half of their money just sitting in Paris. France said this arrangement kept their economies stable, protected them from inflation, and made trade easier. Critics said it was a colonial tax that kept these countries dependent and poor. Either way, France had direct control over the economic policy of 14 sovereign nations. They couldn't print more money, couldn't adjust their exchange rates, couldn't make basic decisions about their own economies without French approval. So what changed? Why did this system that lasted over 60 years suddenly fall apart between 2022 and 2025? It started with frustration that had been building for years. Across Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, terrorist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS were spreading, killing thousands of people and forcing millions from their homes. French troops were supposed to be there to stop this. They launched Operation Barkhane in 2014, sending over 5,000 soldiers to fight these groups. But the violence only got worse. By 2023, deaths from political violence in the region jumped 38% in just 1 year. People started asking a simple question. If France has all these troops here and we're still not safe, what exactly are they doing? That anger exploded in 2020 when Mali had its first coup. The military overthrew President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, accusing him of corruption and of failing to protect the country. France condemned the coup but kept its troops there. Then in 2021, there was a second coup in Mali. This time, the new military leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, made it clear French troops needed to leave. By 2022, France pulled out of Mali completely. The same pattern repeated in Burkina Faso. 2 coups in 2022 brought Captain Ibrahim Traoré to power, and he immediately told France to pack up. About 400 French special forces left by early 2023. Then came Niger in July 2023, and this one hurt France the most. Niger was supposed to be their most reliable partner. They had repositioned 1,500 troops there after leaving Mali, thinking it was safe. But the military overthrew President Mohamed Bazoum, and angry crowds stormed the French embassy, setting it on fire and waving Russian flags. The new junta ordered French ambassador Sylvain Ité to leave within 48 hours. France refused at first, saying they didn't recognize the coup leaders. The junta revoked his diplomatic immunity. French troops survived on military rations inside the embassy. By December 2023, they were gone. Chad, which had been one of France's most loyal allies for decades, followed. At the end of 2024, Chad's military leader cut all defense ties with France and told them to withdraw. Then Senegal, under new President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, announced in his 2025 New Year's address that all foreign troops would leave. Even Ivory Coast, where President Alassane Ouattara had been friendly to France, said the 600 French soldiers stationed there would hand over their base and leave in January 2025. One by one, they all fell. By the start of 2025, France's military presence in West Africa had shrunk to almost nothing, with just small detachments left in places like Djibouti and Gabon. But here's where it gets complicated. These military juntas didn't kick France out because they wanted democracy. Most of them have extended their own rule, postponed elections, and cracked down on opposition. Mali was supposed to hold elections in February 2024. They postponed them indefinitely. Burkina Faso promised a return to civilian government by July 2024, then extended military rule for 5 more years. Niger did the same thing. So when people in these countries celebrated in the streets, cheering as French troops left, what exactly were they celebrating? Freedom from colonialism, or just a changing of the guard? This is where the story gets darker, because when France left, they didn't leave a vacuum. Russia moved in almost immediately. The Wagner Group, a private military company with close ties to the Kremlin, started deploying mercenaries to Mali right after French troops withdrew. By 2024, Russian contractors were confirmed to be operating in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, the Central African Republic, and Sudan. They weren't there to fight terrorism. They were there to protect the juntas, train their soldiers, and help them hold on to power. Unlike France, which at least paid lip service to democracy and human rights, Russia didn't care about any of that. They offered guns, propaganda support, and regime protection with no conditions attached. For military leaders who just seized power illegally, that's exactly what they wanted to hear. In July 2024, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger made it official. They formed a new alliance called the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. They signed a mutual defense pact, created a joint military force, and announced plans for a new investment bank that wouldn't rely on Western lenders. They even started talking about launching their own currency to replace the CFA franc. In January 2024, all 3 countries withdrew from ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, accusing it of being a puppet of Western interests. They left the African Union's standby force. They pulled out of international agreements. Essentially, they said, we're done with the West, we're doing this on our own. China is playing a different game entirely. They're not sending troops or mercenaries. They're building roads, ports, power plants, and cell phone towers. China has poured billions into infrastructure projects across West Africa over the last decade, and they're not slowing down. They don't lecture about democracy. They don't demand political reforms. They just build things, give loans, and expect those loans to be repaid, often with access to resources like minerals, oil, or agricultural products. For countries desperate for development and tired of being lectured by their former colonial masters, China's approach looks pretty appealing. The problem is, those loans come with strings attached too, just different ones. If you can't pay them back, China might end up owning your port or your power grid. The United States got caught flat-footed in all of this. Niger was their biggest security partner in West Africa. They built a massive drone base in Agadez that cost over $100 million. After the coup, they tried to maintain a relationship with the junta, hoping to salvage something. It didn't work. By August 2024, the last US troops left Niger, abandoning the base. Germany withdrew its soldiers around the same time. The UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, which had been there for 10 years, shut down in 2023 after the junta forced them out. Western influence in the Sahel didn't just decline, it collapsed. So here's what we're left with. 3 countries ruled by military juntas that promised to fight terrorism, but have actually seen terrorism get worse. Over 2,000 people in Burkina Faso, 1,500 in Mali, and 300 in Niger have been killed by violence just since the start of 2024. And here's the really disturbing part. Government forces and their Russian-backed allies have killed more civilians in the name of fighting terrorism than the terrorists themselves have. Human rights organizations report widespread massacres, arbitrary detentions, and complete restrictions on press freedom. The juntas don't let local or foreign media report on what's actually happening, so the true scale of violence might be even worse than we know. over 110,000 people have fled to neighboring countries like Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, and Benin. The economic situation is just as grim. When these countries left ECOWAS, they cut themselves off from a regional market of 400 million people. Free movement of goods and people across borders, which used to be guaranteed, is now in question. Trade routes are disrupted. Smuggling is increasing. And the armed groups everyone claims to be fighting against are making millions of dollars from drug and migrant smuggling because borders are less secure than ever. The new Sahel Investment Bank that the AES countries created is supposed to fund development without Western help, but no one knows if it will actually work or if it's just for show. And then there's the question of sovereignty. Is this real independence, or did these countries just trade one master for another? France controlled their currency, their military policy, and their political systems for decades. That was clearly wrong, clearly a form of neo-colonialism. But now Russia is providing security, China is building infrastructure and holding debt, and these military centers are answerable to no one, not even their own people. Elections keep getting postponed. Opposition politicians are silenced. Civil society is shrinking. When protesters who once cheered the end of French influence try to criticize their new military rulers, they get arrested. So what kind of sovereignty is that? France is trying to salvage something from this disaster. In November 2024, President Macron's special advisor on Africa submitted a report calling for a complete rethinking of France's military presence on the continent. The new strategy is to keep just small liaison teams in a few countries, offer training and equipment on request, and stay behind the scenes. France still has economic interests in West Africa, particularly in uranium from Niger and oil from other countries, but their political leverage is gone. Some French officials talk about supporting regional initiatives led by African countries themselves, like the Accra Initiative, which brings together Ghana, Ivory Coast, Benin and others to prevent jihadist groups from spreading south. But France's reputation is so damaged that even offering help makes people suspicious. The days when Paris could call an African president and tell them what to do are over. The tragedy here is that the people of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger deserved better than French neo-colonialism, and they deserve better than military dictatorships backed by Russian mercenaries. They deserve governments that actually represent them, economies that work for them, and security forces that protect them instead of killing them. But that's not what they're getting. What they're getting is a dangerous experiment in sovereignty without democracy, independence without accountability, and a rejection of Western influence that's opening the door to something potentially worse. Because here's the thing about power vacuums, they don't stay empty for long. When France left, Russia, China, and even Turkey and the United Arab Emirates saw an opportunity and moved in. The Sahel is rich in gold, uranium, oil, and other resources. It sits at the crossroads of Africa, controlling migration routes to Europe and trade routes across the continent. Whoever controls the Sahel has leverage over an enormous region. That's why this matters far beyond West Africa. This is a preview of what happens when colonial powers finally lose their grip, but local institutions aren't strong enough to fill the gap. It's what happens when people's legitimate anger at exploitation gets hijacked by strongmen who promise sovereignty but deliver repression. So what comes next? Honestly, no one knows. The juntas in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger keep extending their rule and making promises they don't keep. Violence keeps getting worse. Russia keeps sending mercenaries. China keeps building infrastructure. France keeps losing ground. And the people caught in the middle, the farmers who can't access their fields because of fighting, the families displaced by violence, the young people desperate for jobs and a future, they're the ones paying the price for all of this. This is not the end of French influence. It's the end of one chapter and the ugly, uncertain beginning of another. And whatever comes next, it's being written right now in blood, in broken promises, and in the choices that ordinary Africans are making about what kind of future they want and who they're willing to trust to help them build it.